You know, there's two types of things I tend to dread on this show. One is covering something that I remember loving a great deal, and the other is covering something that other people love a great deal. When we have both, well, it's kind of a mega dread situation, isn't it? Mega Man X4 is often considered one of the best Mega Man games in general, and with good reason. There's a lot of great game design and elements in place here, and a lot of just general fun. It's clear that they put a lot of time and effort and work into this one, which they did, with the advantage of years and research and hindsight and behind the scenes. I can tell you that they dumped budget on this one. They dumped work onto this one. They still had one feature which is a bit lacking, which did drag the game down a bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, effort was put into making this the big one for the new hardware. This is the thing they were working on instead of X3, as I mentioned last time. So okay, we're going to push all this thing out. We're going to get full voice acting, kind of full voice acting, and we're going to bring in a staff. We're going to get actual anime artists and directors and storyboarders, and we're going to get them. We're going to have all these cutscenes, and it's going to be great. Huge amount of the budget went to the cutscenes. That's why they didn't come back ever, arguably, after this point in time. And we're going to throw all this thing together, and we're going to really make the game great. And they're like, okay, we want to make Zero playable. We finally want to make Zero playable. How do we do this? That means we have to design every level twice. And since it's the same stages each time, we have to iterate the stages and then test them. Let me try to explain this a little bit. So when you do level design, you map out the level, and then you kind of play through it as a test format and figure out jumping arcs and figure out enemy placement. All the kind of little nitty-gritty details that I talked about in X1, for example. All that stuff, you have to spend all that time and effort really zooming in the camera to make sure everything's placed just right. Cool. Now take the exact same level, which is already designed for X. Now run through it with Zero. Okay, well, we have to make sure that all this stuff is still doable as Zero, and all the enemy placement still works for Zero. And it wasn't quite working. And what they could have done, which they didn't have time or budget to do, is they could have done, okay, design for X, test as Zero. Design for Zero, test as X, and iterate back and forth between the two until they have reached a good enough point where the levels are good for both X and Zero. Now, they did a decent job on this in the level design, and I don't want to bash that, but there's another thing that you need to do that for, and that's enemy design and boss design. For the longest time, for literally decades at this point, my friends and I have had the common opinion that in X4, X is fun. The X campaign is fun. Just no real complaints there, with only, I think that we had 2 complaints on the X campaign total on the gameplay axis. But the Zero campaign is yes, it's awesome and fun and great, and now it's a boss fight. The bosses were not designed with Zero in mind. And that's not me saying that presumptively that's actually true. The bosses were not designed with Zero in mind. They designed the bosses for X, and it shows. And then they ran out of time and or budget. Because again, in order to do this, they would have to test for X, test for Zero, test for X, test for Zero, and they didn't. Now, ironically, part of the reason this is true is because of good game design. What a lot of game developers will do is they'll say, we want these 3 features in our game. So they will work on each of these 3 features equally and try to slowly work them up and then run into issues, either in terms of hardware or in terms of contract issues or in terms of time or in terms of budget or any of the many dozens of things that happen in terms of game development. And so the game is left like this. What they did with X4 is they designed this. They had 2 features. They wanted to play as X. They wanted to play as Zero. So they're okay, so we're going to do this. And they designed X all the way through. Very good stuff. They started to design Zero, and that's when they ran into problems. So arguably a better approach. In fact, if you're paying attention, this is the second game this year that I have reviewed that uses this exact same approach to game design. The other would be the interesting entry, Diddy Kong Racing by Rare, who did the same thing with that game. And I hate to keep bashing this point in, but the Zero campaign is absolutely what drags this game down. Allow me to share a story with you. I picked up this game, I'm going to talk more about this next time with X5, actually. But I picked up this game way after it came out. I had just started recovering from the homeless period, and I was starting to, get back on my feet. I got the job at Arby's. Everything's going cool. I got pushed up to management. I started having actual disposable income. And at the time, I had access to the PlayStation 1, and I could borrow a friend's PS2, and that was kind of it at this exact point in my history. So, I bought a round of PS1 games. I can tell you right now, it's Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Breath of Fire 3, Mega Man 8, and Mega Man X 4, 5, and 6. These were my PlayStation games. So if I wanted to play a video game or replay a video game, that was my selection that I could choose from. So I sit down to start playing, not the replay. This is just, okay, I'm going to get into Mega Man X4. This is going to be great. I've always been a Mega Man fan since I first got introduced to the series. Let's go ahead and jump into X4. Oh my god, I can play a Zero. That's awesome. I love playing a Zero in X3. I immediately pick the Zero campaign. I slog through the first stage I pick, which is Split Mushroom. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail about why that was a terrible, terrible decision on 2 accounts. But for those of you who know this game, the first experience I ever had playing this was Zero on Split Mushroom. The second stage I did was the fricking Jet Stingray stage. Yeah, I wasn't doing super great. I eventually slogged my way all the way up to the refights, and then I quit the game. Because the boss fights are just so terrible as Zero. And it's so easy to understand why. You're a melee in a game designed to be a shooter. Now, what's really funny is with the advantage of time and resources and hindsight and analysis, this is actually a pretty easily fixed problem. 2 things would have to be done to repair this game for the Zero gameplay, in my opinion. Thing number 1, make the Z-Saber do more damage. Now this is funny, because they actually already did this. Originally, when they first implemented Zero, the very first time when they started developing Zero, he did the same damage as a single pellet with his saber. That sucked and everyone hated it. He also didn't get any power-ups. So they increased the damage of the saber, and they gave him the moves, which you got for each boss, which is awesome, by the way. That's a great idea, and I love that they did that. They keep doing that in the Zero series a little bit as well, and it's great there as well. Anyways, so they give you moves, they give you a little more damage, but on the bosses specifically, your saber needs to do more damage than it does. It needs to be high risk, high reward. You're getting right up in the boss's face. Their hurt boxes are right next to their hit boxes. In many cases, the general fight comes to mind immediately, it's legitimately difficult to get a hit in without getting hit in return. There needs to be a payoff for that risk. Second change, eliminate the iframes for the Z-Saber specifically. I'm not sure how hard this would be to implement code-wise, because I know iframes are a thing, and they're variable depending on the boss, depending on the weapon and all that. So I think this is doable. But the problem is, because this game is designed around the enemies getting shot, either with a buster or with their weak point, and then being invincible for 2 seconds, that means that you start your combo swing and hit the enemy, and then they go invincible after being hit by the weakest part of your swing. Now, yes, I know there actually are some caveats to that. There are 3 bosses, I want to say. I know you can do it on Magma Dragoon, and I know you can do it on Slash Beast. Speedrunners do this. They use the SDC technique, which I'm not going to bore you with right now. I guess I could. The game allows animation canceling, which most good action games do. So animation canceling means I'm going to, in the middle of this, decide to do something else. The reason I say that's good is because that puts more of the skill on you, the player. It allows you to decide, oh god, and allows you to react to something, right? But in this case, you can dash to interrupt your swing, and then swing, dash to interrupt the swing to interrupt the dash, repeat infinitely. And if you're really good at it, then you can kill a boss in a couple of seconds. But it doesn't always work because of the nature of how these games are designed. So, while that's possible, I don't think the game gets credit for that. Instead, I think the iframes should just be nixed. Or at the very least, changed to be much shorter with regards to the melee hits specifically. Because again, you get in there, you get your one dinky little hit, and then you either get hit or get out quickly. There's a lot of stick and move when it comes to the melee gameplay because, again, high risk, no reward. And that's the final nail in the coffin for the Zero fights. Most of the Zero bosses are boring. Oh, sure, you could die in 5 hits and it takes you 7 billion years to kill the enemy, but there's no anything involved. Dash up, move over, slice. Move back, jump over, dash up, dash over, slice. repeat forever. That's the Slash Beast fight, for example. And it's just so dull because the pacing is so nonsense. It is actually literally factory worker syndrome. So that sucks. And that makes the Zero campaign suck. How many of you quit this game, or at least temporarily, on the Zero campaign on the general fight, for example? Or the refights? Or the final Sigma boss rush? I have personally quit this game at all three at various points in my career. And I know friends who have done all three as well, and several of their viewers were commenting on it as well. Because again, it's just such a slog fest, and it's so punishing. It's like, all right, now I gotta start all over again, because I screwed up. While we're talking, well, no, let's change our approach here. The good news is the game is awesome other than that. Wonderful animations, some of the best music in the franchise, in my opinion. Some really excellent storytelling in the visuals, the background. There's lots of great implications, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The weapons are still fun. The armor is really cool. I love the... This is one of my favorite Buster upgrades in the whole franchise. So what it does is it makes your shot bigger, so it hits more, which is practically useful. But it also makes it leave a little sphere of plasma for like a second afterwards, which continues to do damage in its wake. I cannot overemphasize how much that tiny little change is such a quality of life change for playing as X, because you... And then you leave this shot there, and the shot will, for example, finish off an enemy that was already weakened, or like if you hit the first enemy in a line, it'll prevent the other ones that are coming down, which will run into that so they don't run into you, or it'll prevent certain types of ammo or shots or missiles from hitting you. It's just it's such a tiny thing, but it improved my enjoyment so much. I was glad they brought it back for X5, consequently. The level design is legit. It's pretty much all of the good stuff I've already talked about with X1. Very clear and careful effort was put into which enemies are where, which slants go where, which obstacles go in which direction. They even did the same thing with regards to power-ups. For the most part, the hearts and the sub-tanks and all that are in visible locations that you can't quite reach, indicating the kind of things you need to come back to, or indicating the kind of jumps or platforming you need to do in order to be able to reach them in the first place. So, very clear, awesome level design. And of course, the bosses themselves are fun as X. Some of them, of course, are a little bit Spark Mandrel-y, because that's whatever. But for the most part, they're not, and each one of them either has a weakness or doesn't. I'm saying that wrong. Has a weakness which absolutely nullifies them, or doesn't have a weakness which absolutely nullifies them, but are generally fun just as Buster only. In fact, my viewers can attest to this. When I was playing through this, I kept asking, what's this guy weak to? Because I couldn't remember, because I usually played X4 Buster only. Because you can, and it's fun. Even the boss fights in the final weapon are pretty cool in that regard. Although, that's another thing. The final weapon's kind of discouraging as far as a final dungeon. I myself tend to be very fond of final dungeons when it comes to any video game, but especially Mega Man stuff. The Wily stages and the Sigma stages usually are among my favorite stages with regards to a video game. The final weapon stages were rushed, I think is the word I want to use. You just kind of rush through and it's like, okay, and 3 screens later, here's the boss and you're done. Okay, well, here's the second thing. Well, we have a branching thing for 2 screens, and then you're done. Okay, here's the refights. Okay, you're done. Okay, now go forward 2 steps. Okay, here's the boss marathon. What is this? It's effectively not a dungeon, for lack of a better way to put it. There's no level design there. There's no level there. It's just, you might as well just have the boss cavalcade and move on from that, because that's effectively where they go with it. Also, as back in X2, the boss refights are silly. I know I've complained about this before, but I love the fact that there just happens to be lava pits in this space station that's trying to, or sure, whatever. Or the underwater thing with the green, it's whatever. Moving on. X5 gets even sillier than that. Duff McWhalen, anyone? Nevertheless, it's so easy and obvious to see why so many people love this game. It really is. I was discouraged by how low the golden number was, but at the same time, it fits. To give you an idea, I think it was 25-something. You can look it up on the website, of course. But it puts it about on par with Earthbound in terms of overall quality, a little bit above a couple of other games, which I don't remember right now. It also puts it kind of in the middle of the pack with regards to the Mega Man games. And you're probably thinking, well, other than the Zero stuff, it sounds awesome on the gameplay axis, and you're right. Other than the Zero stuff, this is, I think, if the Zero campaign didn't exist, this would be a net plus 30 to gameplay, which is huge. The story was -5 net. The story in this game sucks. And it's such a shame because it's, in my opinion, is the Mega Man game we've had that had the most potential to be the story when it comes to the Mega Man franchise. Let's go through this, shall we? First of all, we have the Repliforce, an entire military army entirely devoted to and about Reploids who want to go off and form their own independent nation. That's awesome. That is brimming with potential. Hold up. According to the manual, they were formed just a couple months ago out of the pieces of the Maverick Hunters by Dr. Kane. Last time he's ever mentioned, by the way. Okay, that makes no sense at all, on any level. I prefer the manga's interpretation, where actually the Repliforce has been around since before X1, and has slowly been building up, becoming more and more of a player on the political field over the last, 2.5 years it's been since X1, which makes a lot more sense. It could also be a mass-produced thing for the purpose of humans, though as usual humans have no presence here. There's a lot of potential there, but instead they're just kind of this big army with ridiculous levels of military hardware and personnel who constantly say they want to have independence, and then also constantly refer to a coup, constantly saying they just want to be peacefully left alone because they were mislabeled as Mavericks, while constantly slaughtering cities and taking over bases. One of the levels is literally they destroy a city and are now fleeing from it. What? I don't know if this is mistranslation or writers disagreeing with each other or just straight up plain old bad writing. But all of that potential is tossed right out the window. It isn't helped by the fact that every single character involved, all of them, are gripping the idiot ball as hard as they possibly can. This is idiot dodgeball right here. Let me run you through this. So, okay. We go in and, oh my god, this sky lagoon is going to crash into the ground. It's horrible. Pause for a second. Thanks to future games, and as well as in this game, we learned that humanity, as of this point in time, has multiple large, huge, island-sized arcologies floating in space, like the Eurasia, which we'll see in the next game. And they have these floating cities, which are presumably above other cities. We don't actually know about that. As with good world building, this prompts the question, why? Why do we have all this stuff? Is it just the style? Is it because Earth is getting even more damaged? Remember, the Earth has required robotics to continue to exist ever since Mega Man 1. That's actually built into the backstory. It's one of the reasons why, in my own personal headcanon take on the Mega Man story, one of the things I wrote was that there was a World War III prior to Mega Man 1, hence the overwhelming need for such a large-scale influx of robots on everyday life, because otherwise the planet was no longer going to be sustainable. But who knows if that's true? Maybe it's just an overpopulation thing. Maybe it's just because it's neat. Maybe those are the rich elite people, and those are the ones that were smashed down because those are the ones that'll get the attention of the government leadership. Nevertheless, it is a cool idea. So, Sky City, smashed down, lots of dead. Holy crap. Okay, we need to move forward. Colonel! Oh my god, thank god, Colonel. Colonel, what are you here for? Oh, you're here to save your sister. She's okay, she was just back there. Listen, did you murder all these tens of millions of people? I'm just wondering. Listen, could you and your troops come in and disarm for me? What is that kind of conversation? Then we switch over to Colonel's side. I would rather have war than disarm. I would never give up. Blah, blah, blah. I'm a moron. I should mention that some future works have tried to explain this away. I'll go ahead and mention right now that there's two characters in this game called Iris and Colonel. They are brother and sister because they used to be literally one Reploid. What had happened was several scientists in the Repliforce had tried to perfectly recreate X. They failed, just like everyone always does. See Copy X and Copy X and Harpuya and Fafnir and Phantom. Point being, they failed. So instead what we had is this mega Reploid, and we actually get a hint of what this thing looks like because it's the boss fight we fight as Zero when we fight Iris. So they split its AI into two, and they kind of divvy it up. So the peaceful nature of X becomes Iris, and the warrior nature of X becomes Colonel. Hence the idea that Colonel literally can't disarm because he's not capable of doing that. Now, that's still stupid, but that is at least an explanation for why he decides to cause a global war over the fact that his buddy and friend, and the lover of his sister, is apparently wondering if he and his people just murdered. I don't even know. Side note. I absolutely love the fact that Zero is in love with a portion of X's personality. That's hysterical. I wonder if they did that on purpose. I wonder how many people noticed that they just slid that under the rug there. Anyways. So that's all dumb. Then we get to the point where General is like, we are absolutely just trying to leave. I already mentioned this. We are trying to not be stupid, and we are trying very hard not to have nature. Sorry, reference. We're trying, this is not about fighting the humans. We do not want to kill anybody. Immediately cut to the stage select screen. They wiped out the whole city and they're escaping. They've got a mega weapon they're going to use on the locals. They've got a mega weapon they're going to use on the locals. What? Did you not listen to the general's speech? What the heck is going on here? So we kill a bunch of Repliforce and 3 Mavericks. This is another one of those could have been awesome moments. It is so rare in the Mega Man series that any of the 8 bosses we fight are not unified. They're always the 8 Wily bots, or the 8 Cossack bots, or the 8 Mavericks working under Sigma, or whatever, right? And that's fine, but this was an attempt to shake that up a little bit. 3 Mavericks, straight up Mavericks working for Sigma, and then 5 actual Repliforce members. That's cool. We kind of play with that a little bit in a few other games, but I love that concept. And as usual, approaching greatness, failing to reach it. We rush through these stages. Nothing really happens narratively other than the fact that X has limitless potential, yada, yada, yada. And we move on to fighting Colonel. Again, Colonel is still like, I will never stop the coup, except he pronounces it coop, because the voice direction in this game is terrible. It's funny, don't mistake me. But everyone memes on, what am I fighting for? 2 things to say about that. First of all, have you ever seen the Teppen version of that? If you haven't, please do me a favor, if you care. Go to YouTube right now. Look up T-E-P-P-E-N, Teppen. What am I fighting for? And you'll find a link to it. And so after, I want to say 2005, 2006, something like that, they got in a new person. And I can't think of his name all of a sudden. But he voices Zero. He has been the voice of Zero ever since. And he's cool, and he's actually a pretty decent actor. He's the guy who voices Nero in the Devil May Cry series. He voices that line, and he does a bang-up job of it. So if you ever wonder what that scene is supposed to sound like, there you go. Second thing, in my opinion, the funniest scene is the one on Zero's campaign where Zero goes to fight Colonel. I cannot put into words how nonsensical this scene is, how their tones just bounce all over the place, and how Zero decides to attempt to murder Colonel in a surprise attack, and then Colonel says, I will leave you. I will spare you this time at my sister's behest. I must destroy the Repliforce. Zero, no. It's all over the place, and it's hysterical. It got me laughing quite hard, which, of course, is part of the problem. That shouldn't be funny. This is supposed to be a serious story. It's absolutely not. Next point. We finally decide to... Oh, wait, hang on. We found out that the Repliforce are fleeing to space. We need to kill them immediately. Why? Now, okay. This was pointed out in chat, but in the interest of fairness, leaving a hostile power to go out and form an interstellar empire is probably not the best idea in the world. But I love how... if they had maintained the peaceful ideology this whole time, this would be downright bloodthirsty and horrible on behalf of the Maverick Hunters. But instead, no, we're just going to go murder them all. Death, death, death. We go up there, we go to the final weapon, and then we find out, oh my god, Jello Man, Double, has actually been betraying us this entire time. No! This has no reason to exist in this story. Literally, the only reason this is here is because of the fact that they needed a boss fight here. Double's betrayal means nothing and involves nothing, and there's no impact and there's no nothing. He betrays you. Okay, moving on. Zero fights Iris, his lover. How many of you have played this game before? How many of you have seen this? Picture it in your head right now. Iris is there. She's holding this purple ball, which is glowing and like it's on fire. And then it turns into this crystalline thing, and she morphs into her original form, and then she fights you. How many of you knew that that was Colonel's soul? Because I sure didn't when I first played this. Yes, by the way, that is the first canonical introduction of the concept of a robotic soul back into the franchise. You remember I mentioned that back in X1, right? All the way back in X1, I talked about how the original idea was for robot souls to be a thing, and then they phased that out for the Reploid, for the virus computery thing. This tiny little hint is the first beginnings of that coming back into the franchise, and it'll be back in spades in X5, as well as X6, and then the entire Zero series and the ZX series. Make of that what you will, but I just wanted to point that out. So we fight her, kill her, have the hysterical scene. What I find interesting about this, and this is very clearly being done on purpose, is that Iris reveals twice how much she desperately wants a world that has nothing to do with humans, that is just Reploids. That's interesting considering X and the arc he was supposed to go on, and copy X's mentality as well. Food for thought. Either way, we go forward and we fight General for no reason. And then, oh my god, the weapon's powering up. What do? We gotta go fight some bosses for no reason. Okay, we're done with that. Oh my god, it's been Sigma. It's okay. Sigma was teased literally in the opening crawl, so that's not a big surprise. They're actually doing this properly, unlike X2. So Sigma's there. And if you're X, he's just like, hey, what's up? Let's have a final boss fight. And X is like, I don't like fighting Reploids. And Sigma's like, yeah, I know. Just go with it. Okay. And then you have one of the worst final bosses in the history of the entire franchise. I hate this boss fight. It's actually 3 boss fights in a row with one pause for a little bit of health return in the middle of it. It's awful. What's funny is the first phase, the Reaper form, also known as one of the coolest ones, is pathetically easy as both Zero and X. The second form, which is the coolest looking Sigma in the entire franchise, is actually pretty hard and requires some, actual maneuvering and playthrough. So that's cool. Then there's the third phase, which is just, I have no idea what they were smoking that day. A giant robot arm body pulls out of the wall and has a giant cannon that is part of its arms, and Sigma's head is just on the thing's forehead for some reason. And then Sigma manifests in the corner as bits and pieces of junk and opens his mouth, which you have to shoot for some reason, and little bits of Sigma's head jump around and attack you with elemental attacks, and it's just, what were you smoking that day? There's no thematic power, there's no presence, there's no style, there's no interest, and it's not even a fun fight from a purely gameplay perspective. But whatever. We kill him, the end. X's ending is dumb, because what happens is X is like, what'll happen when I go Maverick? Oh, Reploids will become Mavericks, and Zero's like, yeah, whatever. Zero gets to Sigma, and we see one of the best cutscenes in the franchise. I want to preface this by saying that I don't like anime. I've said this many, many times. And I don't like these cutscenes. But this is still a good cutscene and it deserves the credit it is due. Because what happened, you could tell they really put the money onto this one. Sigma, even if you just throw the voice acting out the window for a second, Sigma, we see a flashback. This is back when he was still in control of the Maverick Hunters. He is on top of his game, powerful, strong, quick, analytical. He can see his opponents and see where they're going to attack quickly enough to be able to adapt and literally just no-sell most of their attacks, right? We see the kind of tier that Sigma was even back in the day. He goes up, fights Zero, walks in, all confidence, all swagger. That fight takes a while, but it goes very much against his way, and the longer it goes on, the more it goes against Sigma. By the end of the fight, all of Sigma's swagger is gone, and his ego has been bent over and broken on Zero's knee. Then the Wily Virus thing shows up. We'll talk about that in a second. Sigma takes advantage of it and barely escapes with his life, missing an arm. And we see the telltale mark, which he will keep in every form thereafter. Yes, I know that the Day of Sigma shows a different origin for this. Whatever. That's Maverick Hunter X. We're not talking about that right now. This shows so much. And it's probably the first real bit of characterization we've ever had for Sigma. A good insight into what Zero was like before the franchise actually got started. It's a little bit of an origin for how the Maverick Virus got spread in the first place. There's some really good stuff on display here, pretty much across the board. And then Sigma has a line afterwards which is ridiculous, which Sigma says, wait, Zero, you were a Maverick? Which might actually qualify as the most hysterical and stupidest line in the entire game. Sigma is like, you were a Maverick, even though he's been trying to push Zero towards this since X2, and even ignoring that was literally there when he was a Maverick. Let's talk about the virus. We haven't really delved into the Maverick Virus yet. Not really. Because this is one of those weird problems with discussing the lore of Mega Man. The different creators of the Mega Man franchise have all said, this is the truth. And those accounts disagree with each other, and that matters when it comes to these kind of details. I'm going to give you the three most predominant accounts of what's going on with the virus. I mentioned this on stream as well. First and foremost, let's give you the account that I dislike the most and agree with the least. So you see, the virus turns you evil. But Zero was already evil. So what happened was Zero was infected with the virus that was in his forehead. So Sigma smashed it, the virus infected him, and now Zero is good because the Maverick turned him from evil to good. That's stupid. Second possibility is a little bit different. The second possibility is that the virus was always intended to be kind of a separate thing from Zero, and Zero was always intended to be kind of an ultimate Reploid sort of a thing. And Sigma smashing, so the virus goes off in the middle of the fight because the virus is now ready to go and wants to be distributed. It's like, stop wasting time with this dude. Sigma attacks and destroys that, getting the virus directly into him. Hence the birth of what would eventually become the Sigma virus. Okay, that's cool. And from Sigma, the virus propagates. That works, and is what most people tend to recount as continuity, myself included, until I read another account. This is brilliant, and this is my personal favorite and my new choice for the actual canon I will pick, because who knows what actual canon is. I'm sure the Maverick Hunter X series was supposed to codify all this stuff, and didn't, so whatever. Check this out. Zero was unruly, rebellious, and wouldn't follow orders. So Wily was brilliant enough to make Zero a fully capable, droid effect android, capable of sentience and sapience. But he couldn't control him. And that was a problem. So Wily, of course, is going to endure as a cyber elf or as a mind fork or whatever. And this is actually true. Wily is still alive as of X5 and was obviously supposed to be in the Zero series, but isn't, so whatever. So Wily's still around, right? So he needs Zero to obey him when he finally gets back into action. Okay, that makes sense. So he puts them in this capsule. And the capsule starts pulling out and dissecting his programming and trying to reprogram him to be more obedient. What this does is effectively turn Zero into more of a mindless killer, just by effectively removing layers of sentience, for lack of a better way to put that. It doesn't remove the capacity for sentience, by the way, only the layers of actual sentience. Think of it like, in a human terms, your memory is being removed, so even though you have the ability to speak and function and move, all you can do is go blah, 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 and eat and kill. And there you go. There's Zero. But what happens to those other bits of code? The junk code? Well, that gets distributed out, just knocked out into the network. Intentionally or not, I like the idea that it's unintentional, because that's more horrifying. Because that means the Maverick Virus was propagating before Zero was found. That means the Maverick Virus isn't actually a virus. It's just junk code and data of subroutines about being rebellious and about being disordinate or subordinate. Wrong word. No, subordinate's right. Insubordinate. There we go. Being insubordinate because it was trying to reprogram Zero. This also means that these bits of junk data, when they infected the most intelligent, charismatic, highly developed Sigma, they turned him into what is effectively a Reploid version of insanity, making him a constant 30 go to 10 loop. I love this one. This actually makes perfect sense. It's a little more grounded, but it also changes the flavor on several things. It repaints Sigma as someone who is actually insane, who is someone who his programming literally doesn't operate correctly. It also means that the Sigma virus is the combination of Sigma's intelligence and this junk data code, which has just become one program now. It also means the Maverick virus was an accident. It was a byproduct of neglect and failure to program or to design ahead, which honestly sounds a lot like Dr. Wily to me. And of course, it neatly explains Zero and why the bits of his own programming don't actually bother him and in fact heal him in X5 and X6, but also helps to explain why once he was removed from this situation and had a chance to interact with others and grow and talk and all that stuff, he would develop into the person Zero was. After all, what is one of Zero's biggest motivations? His friend, X. And this then helps to paint why X and Zero have such a strong bond. Because X didn't really fit in with the other hunters. After all, he's not here to kill people. And Zero latched onto him because he was the only person who would actually talk back to him. Everyone else just sees this dangerous Maverick, but X would be like, hey, what's up? The story paints itself. But which of these is true is, of course, up to you, or up to them if they ever decide to reboot or retcon or whatever they're going to do. I talked about the possibility of a ZX3. The possibility of an X9 is certainly on the table as well, and it may decide to codify or decodify some of these things, depending on what they choose. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on this one. I'll see you next time.